I'm very excited to share with you my one big idea. It's something I've been obsessed with for at least 8 years, maybe 9 years. And it's fundamental. It is so fundamental that sometimes we forget about it. But I believe that if my idea is implemented, the changes and the results will be revolutionary in terms of economics but you know what? I'm getting ahead of myself. We're here today in this room and these kinds of events in something that I call the Africa Project. And what is the Africa Project? It is our drive to see our continent thrive culturally, economically, socially, so that the sons and daughters of Africa are capable of realizing their full potential in their homeland. That is what we want. Why? Because we cannot infinitely depend on the generosity of others to simply provide the most basic things for ourselves. First, it doesn't make sense. It's not sustainable. But secondly, it's how we think about ourselves, how other people see us if we are perennially a basket case that other people have to take care of. So in pursuit of the Africa Project, though, if you love Africa, if you care about the continent, and you want to see the continent move forward, this is probably the most frightening time to be alive. We are as far away from achieving the goals of what I call the Africa Project than we have ever been in our history. And this frightening reality is worsened even more by the projections and statistics and everything where it's leading. And that frightens me as an African. Why the percentage of people living in extreme poverty has gone down everywhere in the world. The absolute number of people living in poverty has actually increased in Africa. It is so much so that by 2040, 70% of the most of people living in extreme poverty are going to be in 2 African countries, in Nigeria and the Democratic Republic of Congo. So while poverty is reducing everywhere else in the world, it's concentrating in Africa. That's frightening for me as an African, someone who looks out and wants something for the continent. But we're dream weavers, yeah? This is equally the most exciting time to be someone who's interested in Africa and moving forward. Because we have tools, a suite of resources available to us that wasn't available ever, not since 1960s, and it provides us the opportunity to be able to transform our continent. We're at a crossroad. What will be the future of the continent? A dystopian future or a future in which we come closer to the goal of what I'm calling the Africa Project? We're like this young boy who tried to get a wise man to be wrong, because the wise man always answers all the right questions. So he holds a bird in the back. Maybe you've heard this before. And he asked the wise man, is the bird alive or dead? Now his plan is, if the wise man says the bird is alive, he will squeeze it to death and present the wise man a dead bird. If the wise man says the bird is dead, he will present the wise man a live bird. But the wise man, being wise, doesn't answer the question the way he expects. He tells him the answer is in your hands. I think where we end up as a continent, the answer is also in our hands. I would like to tell you what frightens me. A few weeks ago, the Population Reference Bureau released the projections for 2050, and it shows that 26 countries are expected to see their population double. Almost all of them are in Africa. Nigeria is expected to exceed the United States, 109% increase in its population. Niger is expected to see its population triple. As it stands, we barely have the resources to be able to accommodate the population we have. Imagine what happens when that population doubles. As if that were not enough, climate change is expected to affect Africa disproportionately. Why? Because 53% of our people depend on agriculture. And most of that agriculture is rain-fed. That exposes them as the climate heats up. And so it's frightening to think that if these trends remain unchecked, where do we end up as a people? So what I'm going to offer today is not a panacea for the problems that I've outlined, but it's what I am doing to be able to solve that problem. Because as a people, as a continent, as a world, as human beings, as a species, we have been here before. See, in the 1960s, as population grew and food production didn't, there was an assumption. Paul Ehrlich wrote a book in 1968 called The Population Bomb, in which he said that the battle to feed humanity had been lost. He predicted famines and mass droughts, and millions of people would have died in the 60s and the 70s, but it didn't happen. Why? Because of the Green Revolution. We use technology to increase yields. We use technology and fertilizer to transform agriculture in a way that Mr. Early could not have actually imagined. To be able to prevent the dystopian future that our statistics point toward, especially regarding the continent of Africa, we're going to have to need technology. And the technology that I am proposing today is the most basic technology. Actually, I shouldn't call it basic, the most fundamental technology, and that's roads. Roads. I know. It is almost impossible to build a modern society, to build a modern economy without roads. Last year, 2/3 of all freight across the EU was carried on roads. 76% of all goods produced and imported into the United States are carried on roads. Yet, when you come to Africa, only 43% of the roads in Africa are paved. And of that 43% that's paved, it needs an asterisk because it's potholed, it's not maintained. And of the 43% of the roads that are paved across the continent, 30% of that is in one country, South Africa. Can you imagine what it would be like? So let's assume, for the sake of argument, that magically we were able to build power plants across the continent, build manufacturing. How are you going to get this stuff to market? We faced Ebola in the midst, in the peak of the rainy season. And it occurred to us what began as a health crisis was actually an infrastructure crisis. Because you would take blood specimen from people, and even taking the specimen from the patient to the lab, it became invalid because of how long it took in the mud to be able to get across the country. There is absolutely no way to build an economy that allows us to be able to grow, to be able to have the resources. 10 million Africans enter the labor force every year. Where are they going to work? If you can't build an economy, how do you build an economy without an infrastructure backbone? But the technology to make roads functional, paving, that's what we call it now, is too expensive. 40% of the countries in Africa are breaching their sustainability limits. Every time you open a newspaper or go on your Twitter account, somebody's talking about African countries being indebted to China. The debt levels are rising again. So we cannot borrow our way out of this problem. But African economies are so small that our national budgets cannot be able to do this. So how? Without roads, no economy, we can't grow. We can't afford the roads. I'm suggesting this. I know everybody's waiting for it, right? So I took this picture from the Ministry of Public Works. I kept that in there. That's a picture of what the road looked like. I was minister then. And the road looks like this every rainy season. And most people who've traveled anywhere in the tropics are familiar with roads that look like this. Imagine then having to build an economy and run an economy in a country where half of the year the roads in the country look like this. How do you build an economy on this? So at the end of the rainy season, in the dry season, this is what we do. We go back, fix up that thing, and everybody can drive on it. But this is probably the most expensive thing we've ever done, because you have to do this over and over. So here's my thing. Is it possible, forget paving, forget it looking black, is it possible to keep the road looking like this, even in the rainy season, so that the country continues to function, the country continues to move forward, and then as we become wealthy, maybe we can cover it with something else. You see, Norway was in this position in the 1950s. Yeah, I know. In the 1950s, Norway wasn't the rich country you know it to be today. 50% of the Norwegian network was unpaved and gravel. And after the winter, in the spring, as the snow melted, half of the country was inaccessible. So the Norwegian government turned to the Norwegian Road Research Laboratory and told them, we want you to come up with an alternate way of keeping our roads functional. It has to be cheaper than the current measure that we have, but it cannot be more expensive than maintaining the gravel roads that we have. It has to be, we have to be able to recoup our money in 3 years from the lack of maintenance. It took the Norwegians 2 years, 1963 to 1965. In 1965, they came up with a method called the auto seal. The only other country outside Norway, outside Scandinavia, that practiced that was Botswana. 31% of the roads in Botswana are made with the auto seal. What I am suggesting, my big idea, is a prize challenge. It's a prize challenge that invites materials engineering designs from around the world to compete for a prize, to create a product that mixed with African soils, changes the composition of the soil so that the soil remains functional year-round. And that allows us to be able to keep our roads running until we build the money to be, we have the money to be able to do. And when I was Minister of Public Works, I tried. Now, I have very limited resources in Liberia, But I ordered this product from South Africa. I ordered another one from the US and tried it. And basically what you do, you take the product, mix it in a tanker, spray the road with it, do the exact same thing that you would have done before, and it changes the characteristics of the soil and makes the soil function as if it were paved. It worked for like 2 months. And then when the heavy rains came, it failed. But why do I believe this is possible? Because just this week, I wrote a letter to the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. Do you know why? I'm going to tell you. They have developed a chemical polymer that mixed with cement allows concrete to repair itself. Now think about that. If you built a concrete wall and a crack developed in the wall, in 24 hours, the wall will repair itself. So I asked them if it were possible for us to work together to see the application of this in Africa. But what I am suggesting is, as the Gates Foundation did with the toilet challenge, let us pull up a challenge that invites the best minds in the world, some of which are going to come from Africa, but some of which are not going to come from Africa, to develop a product that is used on African roads that allows us to keep our roads open year-round and build an economy on an infrastructure backbone. And this is where I'm headed with this. I don't know if you've seen this before, but this has been the proposal since the 1950s. That is the Trans-Africa Highway Network. This was meant to be just as they have the interstate system in the US, and it would be able to link Cape to Cairo, Lagos to Mombasa. And everywhere you see where the dots are, it means there's nothing there. The roads are there, but they're barely functional. What I'm saying is, if we can find a product that is not as expensive, orders of magnitude cheaper than what we know it to be, we will be able to connect all of that and use it as it is. And somehow, if you were to go to Norway today, you will not see even a single kilometer of the outer seal. Do you know what happened? The wealthier Norway became, they went back and covered it. Before we can get to that point, this is what I want us to do. And I hope we can be able to deliver for the country. Thank you.